Hey, and welcome to Quick Take. I'm one of your hosts, Susie, along with James. How are you, James?
I'm super excited to be here today.
Why is that? Can you introduce our guest?
Oh, we have an amazing guest. So many of our listeners will know. We have Steve Foster with us today, who is a longtime friend and an incredible leader. He has been involved with so many amazing things. And I think, Steve, your experience, what I find most interesting is it has spanned so many different areas of both the startup community, the general community, your work with small companies, large companies, your work, your civic work. I think it's all been really amazing. And I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thanks.
Hey, what we want to talk about today, though, is we really want to jump in and talk about your experience with leaders and leadership. I think that over time, we've had the luxury of working together and knowing that you work with so many good people, but you have a choice. And to do that, you pick and identify the opportunities you want to be part of. And I was wondering if we could talk about, what do you look for in leadership, or, what has really helped you become a great leader? Give us a little bit of, how you think and maybe some of the background there.
I think the background comes mostly from, my upbringing. I grew up kind of in a rough situation as a kid. My parents were not married and there was a lot of conflict, a lot of, stuff, and which resulted in me being homeless at about the age of 16.
Interesting.
And so I found connection with a guy that I've since lost touch with, but Father Dominic kind of kept me on the straight and narrow. And he pushed me in directions to follow my dreams, and in my dreams where I want to save the world, and so that led me to join the military. I was a police officer in the military, and then I was a civilian police officer, and I found some leadership mentors. And I didn't know the word mentor back then. I just knew, hey, this guy's important. This guy has achieved something, or this gal has achieved something, and they're spending time with me. And I just want to hear everything they have to say. And that led me to from being a police officer for about 15 years, that led me to make a decision to go find something else to do. It was a rough career, been in a couple of shootings and almost died in a building fire one time.
Oh.
And I thought, I can do anything and make $47,000 a year. And it ain't so that led me to starting what became my first tech company. In that company, we had a great run. I had that company for about 18 years. The first 10 of it, I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And then I found some mentors through the Colorado Technology Association, where you and I met, James, originally. And I met more great leaders. And I think that company did really well the last 8 years. And we ended up selling it for about 13 times revenue. It was a very, very large 9-figure exit for myself and my investors. And I think through all of it, what has always struck me was I like to do stuff that's interesting. I like to do stuff that's challenging, but I like to connect with people, right? And for me, it's connecting with authentic and vulnerable leaders who realize that they haven't arrived, that they don't know everything. And together we found a lot of answers, and I got to grow. I actually started my second company is now Connect 1-3. And I started it because of the connections that I had and where those connections were taking me. So I thought, why not call the company Connect? And 13 was my badge number when I was a police officer. And I never want to forget where I came from in my formative years as a teenager and in my early stage of my career. And so that's always been very important to me. And I've been blessed to be able to be in a room with people who wanted to share their experiences with me. Maybe some of it was wisdom. Maybe some of it was battle scars. Maybe some of it was just vulnerable words that they wanted to have someone in a trusted environment to talk to. And that just perpetuates and continues. And I really look for that in the people, the capacity for someone to be able to be truly authentic and vulnerable and say, I don't know, but we're going to figure it out. Really, I get very attracted to that.
Interesting.
I love your story, and thanks for sharing that, like that connection and that curiosity for people and understanding where you're going. The question I want to know is, what kind of advice, as you look at, you talked a lot about mentorship for you, and you like that connection and giving back to the people that you see that are up and coming. When you look at leadership, what are the components that you think you tell those mentees that are so important that they embrace?
There's 3 words that really stand out to me when it comes to leadership, and it's grit, empathy, and curiosity. You mentioned curiosity. And you can't achieve success without some level of grit. And you can call it toughness, you can call it stubbornness, you can call it anything you want to call it. I call it grit. And so what I try to impress upon people is not so much what I think they should do.
Mhm.
There's ways I can help them and mold them and, and maybe say, did you think about it this way? Or
Yeah.
have you thought about it that way? But really what I really try to do is have them seek out relationships, right? And connection, because that's where you build bonds of trust. That's where you gain knowledge and information. We can't know everything. And so when we seek out connection in a very authentic and vulnerable way, it's amazing how much comes your way, right? It's amazing the opportunities that you get. And so I really try to get people to be open more so to the fact that the more you, and it's cliche as hell, but it really resonates with me. The more you learn, the more you realize what you don't. And the more people I meet, the more perspective I gain and the more confidence I have in my ability to be able to continue to connect. And I think that that's at the root of it. That's what really drives me, is meeting interesting people and doing interesting things and having interesting conversations that lead to, successes and battles and
Sure.
sadness and happiness,
Mhm.
all that life can offer.
One thing that I find really interesting is this notion that you bring up of grit and vulnerability. And I have found that is a difficult pairing for many leaders to both have the tenacity, have the focus, the goal, the drive, but also be vulnerable. Do you see that is more unique than it should be?
Unfortunately, I think I do. I think I see that vulnerability. I mean, authenticity, I think, is becoming more prevalent,
Yeah.
but I think vulnerability is not quite there yet.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And people are always afraid. Susie and I chatted a little bit about, politics, right? From an office perspective. And people are always afraid to be vulnerable, that they don't know something or they can't achieve
Right.
something, and it's, and I've always said, I don't know, but I'll figure it out because
Mhm.
I have a huge network that I can go ask questions of. I mean,
Yeah.
I've asked you things, James. And so for me, it goes back to my grandfather, and my grandfather was mocked, right? I mean, it's not a secret. The DBJ did a whole article on me about 15, 20 years ago.
Wow.
And when my grandfather died, I stood what they call standing on line and shaking hands. I was a
Yep.
kid.
Yep.
I was probably 21 years old, 22 years old when he died. And I was online for over 4 hours.
Wow.
People just wanted to walk by and shake my hand and tell me how great my grandfather was.
Mhm.
And everybody knew him. And where it started off for me was I said, if I can make a whole lot of people successful in my career, then I'll have a great audience cheering for me when I get my success.
Oh, I love that.
And so that's what it started off as. And what it became was this gigantic sea of friends, friendship
Sure.
of people that I could call up and ask questions, and they could call me and ask me questions, and we could be there for each other and not have an expectation and not feel like, well, why are you asking me? You're the head of $1 billion company. You should be able to know how to do this. Well, that's just dumb. I
Right.
mean, we all don't know everything we need to know, but we know a lot of people who do, and I always tell my teams, we may not know the answer, but the answer's in this room, and if we
Right.
talk to each other, we
Yeah.
will find a way. That's where it's rooted for me.
Sure. Do you think that ability to be both tenacious and vulnerable is something that's genetic? I mean, it sounds like your grandfather created a network of people that truly cared, and I
Yeah.
can see some similarities in the way that you attract people by giving. I think there's a Beatles line that says the more love you get is based on how much love you give. And is that really rooted in this same topic?
I think it is. I mean, I think that love is a big deal. I mean,
Yeah.
and I struggle. I'm just like everybody else. My father never told me he loved me. My
Mhm.
father never told me he was proud of me. My father's nickname for me was Dunce, right? So, God, I mean, that just makes you want to hug people and,
Right.
and
Yeah.
do good things. But the way I looked at it was, it is about love, and you can't be ashamed, but it is about experience too, because you have to go through certain experiences to begin to trust yourself and to trust others and to gain courage.
Hmm.
I think when you have experiences that help build trust and courage, you can be more vulnerable,
Right.
right?
Right.
And you can attract more people by understanding that it is, at the end of the day, it is about love. I mean, I think you may have seen on my LinkedIn, I made a conscious decision several years ago to not like anything, to love everything.
Hmm.
And, and now I'm the 3 Purple Heart guys, so people were like, well, why 3 Purple Hearts? Well, because I'm sick and tired of the anger and the frustration between red and blue from a political perspective. So purple is
Right.
where everybody should be. I just want to respond with love. And so I try to do that with everybody. When I first meet you, you become my brother and you become my sister, and we're there for each other. And I give a lot of trust because, at the end of the day, people gave me a lot of trust and they gave me the responsibility to do a thing. And I was able to do it because of their trust. And so I want to continue to perpetuate that.
You talked about that connection and that love that you give to people and how important that is. And I think people get stuck on like networking and you need to connect, like this concept of growing your network. And they feel like it's self-serving,
It
but
is.
it's like, it's a mindset shift. Like when you think about people that are building their network in the middle of it, that's the way you have to look at going into it.
Hmm.
Do you agree with that concept? Like how do you tell people how to make those connections that last a lifetime?
You have to go into making a relationship or building a relationship or a connection without expectation. Right. And that means I can't expect you to do what I want you to do. And you can't expect me to do what you want me to do.
Yeah.
And a lot of times these connections are based on need at the time and not a relationship over time. And so that troubles me. And so I always try to draw people in who want to make a connection with me from a sales perspective and they want to sell me something. And
Mhm.
so I try to help them build relationships, thinking long-term,
Yeah.
playing the long game rather
Yep.
than transactional relationships. And so I work towards that. And the only way I can do that is to demonstrate that and, and to live that every day. And so that's, I think, has been one of the key pillars of my success.
Yeah. I have to just say, just to make that point, I love people to think about leadership as having impact on others that you may never understand. So you have to show up every day.
You do.
And that's what you just said is you have to show up every day and believe that you are having an impact. Because the day you don't show up in the right way, you
It's
can
still going to have an
have,
impact.
yeah, exactly. Thank you
It's
for
still
saying
going to have
that.
an
Yeah.
impact. You're
Yeah.
still going to have an impact.
Yeah, I have more than one story where I've run into a former employee or a former business partner or a former, somebody who I worked for and has said, there was
Yeah.
this one time you did this thing
Mhm.
that really resonated with me. And you kind of have to say, gosh, I remember that too, and walk away. But knowing I have no recollection of that day. I
Mhm.
don't remember that being important, but clearly it was something that stuck with them. And the fact that I showed up and was my genuine self at that moment, made that moment important for that person. And
Yeah.
that's always a great feeling.
Yeah.
I wanted to,
And-
go ahead, Steve, jump in there.
Well, I was going to say it evolves over time,
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
and it's through learned experiences and
Yeah.
those types of things. And I made a comment one time with a gentleman that had 8,000 employees, and he was the head of Avaya at the time. And he said, "Well, how the heck did you go from being a vice narcotics guy to being a software CEO?" And I'm like, "It's easier. The decisions are easy. No one's shooting at me,
Yeah, for one.
right? No one's poking me with a needle. No
Mhm.
one's puking in the back of my car necessarily. And so these decisions are easier because at the end of the day, you are dealing with people's lives, but it's not life or death,
Right.
right? And so perspective was really important for me to bring into that.
Let's talk a little bit about what some would question as or identify as an interesting jump from basically civil service, obviously in the police ranks, to software and then back to civil service. Can we talk about what you're doing now and how do those things compare and contrast and what are the lessons you learned from those two arguably very different types of ecosystems when it comes to leadership?
Wow. Civil service is very different, working in for a city government is very different than working for a private company, and very different than working for a public company. And I don't think of it that way necessarily. And so I left being a police officer because I didn't think I could be effective anymore, that I had to do something else. I had to do something else for me to continue my journey. Going back to law enforcement was something that's really important to me because of two things. Crime in Colorado and specifically in Denver is bad. And I have companies and employees that experience it every day. My wife experiences it every day. My wife is office, she works at 17th and Broad. So she's right across the street from all. And my son's a police officer. And so he's been a cop now. He's on the SWAT team for Arapahoe County. And he's been a police officer now for about 9 years, 10 years. And so I want to show him the leadership that I could bring. I want it to be an example for him and all the young officers that I could go back. And I think I'm the first ever former police officer that was named as a police and fire commissioner on the Civil Service Commission in the city and county of Denver. And it was interesting because when the city called me up and asked me what I wanted to do, if I wanted to join a commission or a board, and I said anything to do with law enforcement. And they were like, well, that doesn't make any sense. You're a tech executive. And I said, well, but I used to be a cop and I was a police officer for 15 years and they didn't know that. And I said, this is my opportunity to take all the leadership that I've worked on and all the things that I've done and bring it back to something that's really important, not just to me, but to this community. And so it's been a lot of fun, but it is understanding that you gotta block out the noise because there's a lot of noise in working for the city, and you got to stay focused on the outcomes and the goals that you're trying to drive, and you got to bring good people to the table.
Do you still find that there are the good leaders, even in the civic space, that are trying to, you can mentor or that you can learn from, who are really putting some of those qualities out there that you really admire?
Yes. Some of them are wore down.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are frustrated. Some of them are ready to give up. And that's a bad place for us as a community. And, and I look for it from the standpoint of you can learn from anybody, right? I've learned as much from receptionists as I've learned from CEOs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I think the thing that has really struck me is that people just want to know that you care.
Right.
I'm a big Maya Angelou person, and her quote about how you make people feel was the first thing you saw it was 14 feet high and 30 feet wide in my front boardroom when you walked into the company. If you just treat people with respect and dignity and you let them know that you care, it's amazing how a room lights up.
Right.
When I show up to the graduations and everybody comes up and says hi to me because commissioners never come to the graduations before, and I'm like, well, I'm going to see the fruits of my labor. I want to see, I want to put a name to a face. Look, I want that kid to be hired. I want to go say hello and shake his hand or her hand and say, go do the job. And if you need help, call me. Right. Oh. And that just helps people re-energize. And I think we all need that, no matter what walk of life. I mean, being a CIO is hard as hell. Being a CEO is lonely as hell.
Right.
But try being a brand new salesperson, trying to figure out how you're going to get from being a brand new salesperson, which I was when I first left law enforcement, to being the CEO is a daunting task, and if you have somebody that just says, you can do this, just commit to it.
People want like the easy button to leadership, and they think that once you get the title, I've made it there, but it's really the nuances. It's taking the time, it's making the investments, it's leading with curiosity. It's asking a question and then sitting and being silent. And I find so many times leaders believe that they're showing up the right way, but with a little bit of inspection around how they're showing up and challenge. I love that idea. When there's a surprise that you showed up, that's some inspection of what's going on around.
Yeah, it really is. And we're not always going to agree as human beings, right? Mm-hmm. We don't have to agree. We just have to have the conversations, right? And they have to come from the right place. I think if you have people who are willing to have those conversations and they're authentic, then you're gonna do great things.
For sure. So James, I'm going to challenge you. Can you are you going to find some nuggets that
Oh
you're
my
going to
gosh.
take away from this conversation?
This is like
There's a lot.
there's
There's a
so many
pile.
nuggets. I don't even know where to go. I know I have a vision of this little gold card coming out of a mine shaft with dozens of nuggets. But yeah, I think that, it was just, I really loved, Steve, your point of view on grit, empathy, and courage. Just really three great markers for leadership. And I love that those are the things you look for in people that you choose to work
Mm.
with and partner with. And, I took copious notes here, but, I really think that additionally, when you make those connections, I loved hearing that make those connections for a lifetime. It's not transactional.
Yeah.
It's the longer journey. And, ultimately something that I wrote down here that I had a hard time articulating, but I think you said it so well, is so many of us leaders are involved in layoffs and difficult things. But the real part of it is that, we're dealing with people's lives, but it's not life or death. And I do think the importance as a leader to realize, yes, it is not life and death, but it is people's lives. If we remember that, we are more empathetic, we are more open, and we are better leaders. And I think really highlight some of the traits that you find so appealing. So thank you so much for that, Steve. What a great conversation. I know we could go another 4 hours here, but I think we'll run out of minutes on our cell plan or something like that if we keep going.
Right. Well, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate the time today. And, James, as always, I appreciate our friendship. It's been years now, which
Absolutely.
is
I
wonderful. And,
lost track.
and Susie, now you're stuck in my vortex.
Oh
So,
my gosh. I'm excited because what I've learned today is I'm not just a connection. I'm now part of your tribe. So thank you for
you're
that.
part of the tribe. You're part of the
Yes.
crew. So
Fantastic. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.